I've wanted to touch on this one for a while, but I don't really know which angle to take because there's so many things to say about it. And the subject matter is conspiracy theories. Now, when it comes to monetizing this video, I'll probably have to put it under controversial because of some of the things that I'm talking about. So be it. Um, I think it's an appropriate time to talk about this, timely um, point to talk about it because right now, um, the current world situation with coronavirus is rife for conspiracy theories to flourish. Um, Let me just, before I get into some of my thoughts on this, let me just say as a general point, I'm not someone who just outright dismisses all conspiracy theories. So I'm not saying that every single conspiracy theory is nonsense. I don't think that's the case. And I do think it is healthy to question power and authority. And we know from history there has been corruption and cover ups. So it wouldn't be right to just say every conspiracy theory is complete nonsense. Um, Someone I know who is pretty far down the rabbit hole, to put it one way, he made the point that conspiracy theory was a term invented by the CIA in the 60s after the Kennedy assassination. I don't know if that's true or not. It might be, but that doesn't mean that uh, just because the CIA may have coined a term for it, that they all therefore must be true. Um, for me, this is about being objective. Very often, conspiracy theorists insist that, oh, I do my own research, and they seem to think pretty highly of themselves because they've looked at alternative news sources or they seem absolutely adamant that their alternative is correct. Um, but here's the question: at what point does healthy questioning of an official version of things or a mainstream version of things just irrational? That's the question. I've seen a little chart that's doing the rounds, and it kind of has this hierarchy of conspiracy theorists, or theories rather. Um, I don't know who created it, but it's quite interesting. It has at the top, for example, QAnon, they're pretty near the top. And there's a line saying anti-Semitic point of no return, because more often than not, certainly not every conspiracy theory, by no means, but many do, unfortunately, cross into the realm of, oh, the Jews are out to control the world. There's an anti-Semitic bile behind a lot of this stuff. Um, when I look at the late Lyndon LaRoche, um, some of the sort of things he or his school of thought promoted, it's difficult actually to pin down his traditional left or right wing. I think when this overlaps with politics, it gets into something that is beyond the traditional left-right spectrum. It gets into almost an anarchy. Although conspiracy theorists themselves, firstly, they probably wouldn't call themselves that because they see it as a derogatory term. I don't see why it should be derogatory. I mean, let's just break it down. Conspiracy theorist. I don't think it's an insulting term in of itself. Um, it just means that you believe that there is a power dynamic at play. But here's my take. I think that you have certain famous events, and the Kennedy assassination might be the most kind of analyzed, possibly. Although the September 11th attacks, the fake moon landing, the Titanic to some extent, they're all very famous events, and they all have their share of conspiracy theories as well. Now, with the Kennedy assassination, we're talking about the death of one man. well, technically actually free, including Officer Tippett and Oswald himself, and the injury of Governor Connolly. Um, but that's somewhat different than 9/11, where you had 3,000 civilians die. Um, yeah, it shocked the nation in a profound way as well. With the Kennedy assassination, I don't think the conspiracy theories around that are so outlandish because when there's groundwork to them, they're not that outlandish. For example, Oswald didn't act alone because there was fears over Kennedy's policies. Now that is not that outlandish. It's not that crazy. When you look at it that way, I'm prepared to be open-minded about those sort of theories. Oliver Stone's famous film JFK with Kevin Costner was a very powerful film. It had more than a few mistakes, which have been analysed. I watched a documentary showing that there were certain basic details that Stone got wrong. Um, and Stone is clever enough to know the power of film. But I've got a few views on Oliver Stone. I think what he does is he takes American history, modern American history, particularly around notable presidents in the Vietnam War and so on, and he knows how to utilize sentiment in the questioning those people and events. So Oliver Stone is a very skilled filmmaker. I've got some skepticism about him. I think he's become a bit of a Russia stooge in recent years, which to me is a bit hypocritical since this whole thing is about transparency and, the accountability of power. Yet he's cozied up to a regime that has a terrible record on press freedom. So to me, this is indicative of where some conspiracy theories go. Let me talk about some more recent and more controversial ones in the Kennedy assassination, because it's probably the best known, and the conspiracy theories around that are not necessarily dangerous because it's an event that's frozen in history. It doesn't really have an impact on the world today in the same way. So saying, for example, that you don't think that Oswald acted alone isn't particularly dangerous today. It's not, by dangerous, I'm talking about, it's not bigoted. It doesn't get into another realm. But if we look at some of the more recent ones, let's look at 9/11. When people say that the planes that hit the Twin Towers were military planes or they weren't full of passengers, you just have to look at 9/11 memorial pages to see individual people on those flights by name with biographies, with lives, including the youngest victim, um, little girl. I think she was 1 year old, and she was with her parents on a flight to Disneyland. Um, Mixed race parents, a Korean American mother and a white father, and that was the plane that crashed into the South Tower. I think it was, forget the flight number now, American 11, I think. Anyway, you can see those pictures, you can see these people. Now, if you really go down the view that they were military planes and there was no one on them, then you would have to follow, okay, well, they're just fake profiles, they're just made up. Then you would have to follow, well, what about the memorials? What about the people who knew those people? And that's where I think conspiracy theorists can be quite callous. An even more recent example is the Sandy Hook atrocity, which is only one of many mass shootings in America in recent years. But when I see blowhard right wingers talk about crisis actors, led by the likes of Alex Jones, it's frankly disgusting. And, I'm not a parent, but if I'd lost a child in that atrocity, I don't think I could keep my cool with people like that. I really don't. I don't think I could keep my cool. Now, the most recent of all, of course, is coronavirus. Um, and this one varies a lot. You get those who outright believe that it doesn't exist, which is what it is. That's what they believe. You get those who believe it exists, but they believe it's part of a plot to control everyone, some sort of elite plot. One of the theories is it's a microchip invented by Bill Gates. The obvious question is, because this is the point I would make about conspiracy theorists, when they come out with these ideas, there has to be follow-up questions. Okay, so an elite cabal has created coronavirus. The obvious question is why? Then they will come out with something like, oh, well, because they want to control our movements or they want to control our lives. So you need to then think, okay, well, does the world's most powerful people want to really know what Dave or Sally is doing on a Saturday night? And they've waited all this time, created a pandemic, just so that they could make up some sort of drugs to vaccine so that they can secretly insert microchips or whatever the hell it is they believe. Um, why not do it 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Why now? What's significant about this particular time? When you start doing follow-up questions, then they fall flat. CNN was interviewing a guy who believed that Biden wouldn't be inaugurated. He just didn't think it would happen. This was minutes, literally minutes before Biden put his hand on the Bible and, swore to uphold the Constitution. The same guy was asked afterwards. Um, Incidentally, he said he supported QAnon, although he didn't necessarily call himself a QAnon advocate. Immediately afterwards, he was asked what his response was now that that actually happened. And he said he had to evaluate his life, but he didn't have any regrets and he didn't sort of backtrack. So I think there's also a bit of vanity with conspiracy theorists because they're not prepared. The whole thing is about questioning power and accountability, but they're not prepared to, for a second, to think, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I am thinking too much about this. So, you know, there's a stubbornness there that borders into arrogance. Because the other thing is, why they think they're more intelligent than the rest of us? Why is it they alone know what most other people, most scientists, most virologists in the case of COVID, don't know? And this is something that recently I've seen otherwise intelligent people, people I know, even one or two family members have got into this territory, this rabbit hole. And I try not to bring it up for obvious reasons, but because when you're working with someone or when you're close to someone, you want to avoid this sort of stuff. I know this is people have phoned into LBC, their husbands, their wives have got into this stuff, and I think it comes from, in the case of coronavirus, people are utterly, utterly fed up of the lockdown. That's totally understandable. I'm fed up with it. And I think there are legitimate questions over how effective it is and over civil liberties and all that sort of stuff. That's legitimate. But if your response to it is, well, we're going through all of this because the elite have just imposed it on us. So is it your view that Boris Johnson gave himself the virus just so he could control us? It's very sad. It's sad that people are so cynical that they get into this realm. The former wrestler Jesse Ventura presented a documentary series about conspiracy theories. It was quite entertaining, but I didn't really like his style. He very much played up the hard man image. I'm a former Navy SEAL. I'm a former governor. I'm a former wrestler. And I didn't like his style because I think he was capitalizing on that hard man image to kind of, in some ways, push his way around. If you know the show I'm talking about, it was very sensationalized. Even Ventura himself, in one or two episodes, considered some of the things being put forward as nonsense. But when you get someone like David Icke, people defend him. It's easy to dismiss this, but David Icke, Alex Jones, these guys have significant support. So it's easy to dismiss them as nuts, but they've got significant support. In the case of David Icke, you know, he is comes across in terms of his, how can I put it, his style as quite rational, as quite normal. But then when you hear the sort of things he comes out with, you know, world leaders are reptilian shapeshifters. I've heard his supporters get quite angry when that's brought up because they think it's used as a way to delegitimize him. Well, I say if he's never distanced himself from that, if he's never expressed regret for that, if he's never said, okay, I was wrong about that, then he has no legitimacy. Even if he, even if other things he says is a bit more rational, when you get to that point where you're actually arguing that world leaders are reptilian shapeshifters, you can't really expect people to respect that and take it seriously. As for Alex Jones, I mean, the guy is, I think he's unhinged. I really do. But again, it would be easy to dismiss if it wasn't for the fact that there is consequences. When people support that, when they're feeling angry, disillusioned, hopeless, it's natural to want to cling on to an alternative. It's a bit like when there's a tragedy, when there's a tragic accident, human nature is people want someone to blame, even if it really is an accident that's no one's fault. It's just human nature. So I think with traumatic events, um, the official versions just don't help people to cope with it. So some people just find it easier to then say, well, the economy is now suffering, so there must be a reason for that. It's not because we've had this deadly pandemic and it's a consequence of that. It's because the elite want to do it, as if an economic recession is a vote winner. It's obviously not. When there's so many contradictions in the arguments that are put forward. I mean, when you break it down, so many of the arguments just fall flat. But you can literally show a conspiracy theorist physical evidence of something, and they will still say, no, it's fake. So at some point, it's there gets a point, I think, when you can't reason with someone who is that far deluded. And that sounds cynical, I know, but if you try, then they see you as part of you're part of the establishment. You're one of them brainwashed masses because they know better. Anyway, I'll leave it there. I think conspiracy theories are interesting. There's no doubt about it. There's an intrigue there. There is. I've watched documentaries on Kennedy conspiracy theories. I've watched documentaries on Titanic conspiracy theories. But I think when we're talking about more recent events, particularly very traumatic events, what I would say to conspiracy theorists, there's free speech. You can believe in what you want. But when you're saying this stuff, I would suggest that you're being callous and hurtful to people who have lost loved ones, and you're telling them their experience is fake. I mean, that's the bit I really have a problem with when it no longer becomes just questioning authority, but it then transcends into just being callous because they don't have the humility to accept that maybe, just maybe, they're wrong. That's my thoughts. Now, I appreciate not everyone watching this will agree, but at least consider accepting that some things just are what they appear to be, rather than every single thing having to have an alternative explanation. Thanks for watching.